Hello. Today is the second Sunday of Easter. Our first reading is from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 4, verse 32 to 35. Our psalm is Psalm 118. Our second reading is 1 John chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. And our gospel is from John chapter 20, verses 19 to 31. Today we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday, remembering Jesus' eternal mercy for us and his love for us, his unfathomable mercy from which he pours out graces and salvation for all of us. This feast day commemorates the appearance of Jesus to Saint Faustina. Her vision of Jesus with the rays of red and pale white coming out of his heart, red for his blood that he shed for us, and pale for the waters of baptism. This feast day is supposed to be a refuge for all souls, a time when we realize the love of Jesus is infinite. His mercy is all-encompassing and eternal. Our salvation is assured. But the readings for today also include the story of Thomas, called Didymus, Thomas, called Doubting. And on this Divine Mercy Sunday, we can't help but be reminded of our own doubt, of our own skepticism. You see, we all have a little bit of Doubting Thomas in us. That little doubting Tommy that says, you know, I wasn't there. I didn't see that happen. They believe it. But I have not had that religious experience the way that they have. And it comes out many times when we meet someone who has had a come to Jesus moment. The Protestants call it being born again. They have had a life-changing experience with our Lord, and they are just on fire for Christ. On fire. They are at church all the time. They're volunteering for everything. They're praying the chaplet of everything and doing all the devotions to everything. Sending you all sorts of inspirational religious stuff. They're putting bumper stickers on their car. They want you to put bumper stickers on your car. And the people at work are like, what happened to Jed? And all you can say is, well, Jed's been saved. But little doubting Tommy is asking, why wasn't it like that for me? Why didn't Jesus enter my life that way, with a bang, make a bunch of big changes in my life? Am I doing it wrong? Or is Jed just overboard? You see, little Tommy always cast doubt on our religious convictions. Little doubting Tommy looks at Divine Mercy Sunday and says, I wasn't there. Did Saint Faustina really see all this? Did Jesus really say all this? Or is this just a thing because a Polish pope wanted to prop up the faith using a Polish nun's supposed visions? I forgot to tell you that little Tommy is sometimes a jerk. And when you look at the there's the novena, there's the chaplet of Divine Mercy, there's also the plenary indulgence. That's granted to those who celebrate reconciliation and receive communion. And little Tommy says, aha, it is a trick. It's a ruse. This is all just to get me into that box. And we can pretty much figure how little doubting Tommy feels about that box and about the man in that box. Obviously, little doubting Tommy is going to have questions about confession. Doubts as to whether those verses in our gospel today mean what we think they mean or not. Whether the church's understanding of reconciliation is valid or not. Whether he or me or anybody need to ever go to confession or not. My little doubting Tommy leads me to avoid this topic pretty much altogether, especially in a homily. You see, confession is a tough one for a Southern Baptist to convert to. And little Tommy's never been convinced. I have to fight him every time I go. But lucky for me, I have a built-in excuse. Deacons are not supposed to go to their pastor for confession. You know, in case they need to confess their deep-seated resentment or hostility toward the pastor, or all the evil things they've been wishing to happen to him. Now, I don't have anything like that for my pastor, but it's a useful excuse to not go into the box. So I'm supposed to shop around. But what I like to do is I take one of the typical excuses that other parishioners use and I flip it. A lot of times people will say, I don't want to go in there to confession because the priest knows me. And then he's going to look at me funny, and I don't want him knowing my business. And see, I like to take that and I say, well, I don't want to go over to one of these other parishes with these strange priests. I don't even know them. I don't want them knowing my business. Little Tommy's pretty slick sometimes. But the real reason that a lot of us don't go to confession is because of the stigma of pain that's associated with it. It is the only sacrament that we dread and avoid, because that box and that man in that box scare us and make us uncomfortable. And it's not supposed to be that way. For technical purposes, it should be pointed out that you only have to confess mortal sins, not venial sins. And mortal sins have 3 criteria. Mortal sin has to be grave matter, an intrinsically evil and immoral act. Raping, killing, kidnapping, torture, and the like. A mortal sin has to be done in full knowledge. The person has to know what they are doing is evil. And a mortal sin has to have deliberate consent. The person has to freely choose to do it. So off the bat, Doubting Tommy has a good case for not going to confession very often, because I'm not out here raping and killing people. But I think the sacrament is supposed to be about more than mortal sins. A sacrament is a visible expression of God's grace. So for me, I think reconciliation is supposed to be more about encountering God, experiencing His presence, feeling His love and His mercy wash over us. But what happens to us is we have a bad experience with the man in the box, or we hear about someone else's bad experience, and Doubting Tommy starts getting to us, convincing us that we won't really feel anything, we don't really need to go anyway, we don't have any real mortal sins. But it's not supposed to be that way, that we only force ourselves to go if we've actually killed someone. It's supposed to give us the opportunity to talk to God, to open up to Him about what's troubling us, what we feel bad about, to get it off our chest. Because many times we don't usually just talk to God like He's a person, like He's our friend. The Baptists sing a hymn, "What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and grief to bear. And what a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer." We don't sing that one, but we should. We should feel comfortable enough to talk to God like He's our friend. We should be able to say, well, God, we had that big presentation at work yesterday, and Bill and me, we were supposed to present it together, but Bill's kid fell down the stairs, broke her leg, and Bill was at the ER, and he missed work, so I gave the presentation on my own. And the boss loved it. He said I'm such a valuable resource to the company. They're going to give me a raise and a promotion. They thought I did all the work on the presentation, and I let them think it. I didn't correct them. In fact, I didn't mention Bill or his kid at all. Now, is this a mortal sin? Of course not. Is it necessary to confess it? Of course not. Was it a jerk move? Yeah, it was. Will you feel better saying it out loud, admitting that you were a jerk, and asking God to forgive you and help you to not be a jerk in the future? Of course. Will you feel better apologizing to Bill and coming clean with your boss, which is probably what the priest should suggest as a penance? Of course you will. And now most of us would have no problem with that little scenario playing out if we were discussing it with our therapist while we were laying on their couch. We would leave feeling better about life for having worked through that little crisis of ethics in our lives. We'd be happy to give the therapist our check and to make another appointment for another session next week. Because she's helping us to be a better us. And I think that that's what confession is supposed to be like. It's supposed to be therapeutic in that we get to unload some stuff that maybe we're not proud of, whether it's a mortal sin or not. And we get to experience God's presence, mercy, and love, and leave feeling better about life, because this sacrament of reconciliation has helped us to be a better us. But that's not been the experience for many of us. Unfortunately, we either have run into, or we fear running into, A man in that box who has taken our gospel passage too literally and trying to retain those sins here on earth rather than forgiving them. Unfortunately, many times confession becomes more about the man in the box than it is about God's presence, Jesus' divine mercy. Little doubting Tommy is right when he says that some priests make confession intolerable. Those priests are out there, and it drives people away from the sacrament, away from the church, and away from Jesus. And it is my opinion that they will not receive a prize for keeping heaven free and pure from sinners. I think instead they will be punished for failing to save the souls that were in their care. But that's not for me to decide. It's above my pay grade as a fellow sinner. You see, when I had my come to Jesus moment, it was not a realization that I'm good enough and clean enough to make it to heaven. It was the realization that I'm bad enough and dirty enough to need saving. And if God saves me and sends me to heaven, well, then I'll sing and rejoice with all the other saints. But if he doesn't see fit to let me through those pearly gates, well, at least he let me feel his presence here on earth. And even that has been more than I deserve, and it's more than enough. You see, if he lets me in, it's not because I checked off all the boxes. It's because he loves me. When I used to practice law without a license, according to one judge at least, they used to accuse me down at the clerk's office of judge shopping. Well, I had to find one that would let me represent myself, didn't I? But Madam Judge eventually got to all the other judges, and I did have to retire. No more judge shopping for me. But I'm here to tell you that pride and hubris have not gotten to all the priests here in the diocese. There are still many who understand that confession is about experiencing God's grace and mercy. It's not about the man in the box. So I would encourage you to shop around. They've got these boxes in every one of these parishes. It's more important to God that you make a connection with Him than that you make that connection in any particular box. He knows you don't have any mortal sin, probably. So today's celebration of divine mercy is not a trick to punish you. It's another way to connect with God on a deeply personal level. A means to encounter Him in a way that you might not have before. A way to come to Jesus just as you are, knowing that He loves and accepts you no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter who you love. It's a way to know that He wants His mercy to be a refuge and a shelter for your soul, that He wants to pour a whole ocean of graces upon you. Find a priest that understands that. Find a priest who knows how to act like Jesus in that box. It might be your parish priest or your pastor, but it might not, and that's okay. Jesus just wants to connect with you. He will work through whatever idiot He has to. He's working through me right now, so the bar is low. Have a come to Jesus moment. Experience God's mercy and love. Let yourself be sent out into the world, as Jesus sent the apostles, to spread that love and mercy to others. As St. Faustina wrote, to show Christ's divine mercy to our neighbors, always and everywhere.